Welcome into the Andrew Garrison Show. My name, of course, is Andrew Garrison, speaking to you from a dorm room at Indiana University. And once again, my head and the space behind it is taking up half the space as it normally does. That's because we have the great Sean McAvoy. I hope I pronounced your name correctly right there. I realized I forgot to ask you that before we started. But we're here to talk about Indiana women's basketball. So, Sean, I'll give you a second to talk about who you are, what you do, where the people can find you, and why your voice matters in a situation like this.
Yeah, thank you for having me on, Andrew. I'm the women's basketball columnist here at the IDS. So we have two reporters and a columnist, so you can read any of my work at idsnews.com. We also host a podcast, Payoff Podcasts. So not to try, I would say to go watch that after you listen to this one, I'll say. And then I do some writing for the Hoosier Network too, but yeah, for Big Ten men's basketball.
Nice. Awesome. Yeah, definitely phenomenal writer right here with Sean. I remember, we got this whole thing set up because I read one of your columns about a week ago, and it excited me, and I told you it was awesome, and then here we are. So yeah, very great work right there. I'm sure you can look you up on Twitter, that kind of thing, and get to a lot of the great work going on over there at the IDS. We're here to talk about Indiana women's basketball. Sean obviously does a lot of Indiana women's basketball work with the IDS. I cover the team for WIUX, do a little bit of play-by-play broadcasting there. It's been a while for me since I was on air. Had a lot of broadcasting over winter break. I won't again until the Rutgers game, but still obviously keeping up with the team as best as we can. And finally, this team won a Big Ten conference game, and I got lucky because I'm doing this podcast on Thursday, obviously after the Wisconsin game, and fortunately Indiana won against Wisconsin as well. So that storyline of them picking up their first win and now their second win is still sort of fresh. So we'll go with both games. I want to start with the Northwestern game, which was a little while ago now. But obviously the first quarter ends 30-3. And Sean, I'd love to give you the floor here and just your thoughts on the Northwestern game, the first quarter, the game as a whole. What stuck out to you about that win, this team's first win in the Big Ten Conference this season?
Yeah, I got to say 30-3 or 30-0 run in that game just between the end of the first, start of the second quarter there was not something I think anybody had on their bingo card for this team. It was mad surprising. Shea Chesky, she scores 33 points. I mean, she's one of the best players in the Big Ten. Probably, I'll give her some love for Big Ten Player of the Year. I'll say that. She's just been shooting at a high level, kind of being that primary ball handler. She's assisting. Kind of some turnover problems with her is what I'll say. That's probably her biggest, I would say, negative this season. But she's such a good scorer, two-level scorer, gets the basket a lot. But just with that Northwestern game, I was really surprised in that first quarter. I mean, the Wildcats are a pretty good shooting team. I mean, Grace Sullivan is, I would say, I don't know. She's knockdown shooter from the mid-range, one of the best in the Big Ten. But they finished the first quarter 1-17 for the field, and it's like that's not something you predicted coming into this game. I mean, Grace Sullivan's 0 for 6. I mean, she did finish the game with 35 points, but it was kind of out of reach by then. I would say some of her scoring did kind of help bring Northwestern back into this game, and it was a 10-point lead in the fourth quarter for Indiana, which was not something that you wanted to see, and it was good that they still got a win out of that. But Maya Makalewski she's a freshman forward, kind of had that defensive matchup against Grace Sullivan. She performed really well in the first quarter, I would say. It kind of slipped after that, but that first quarter, it was great defensive performance from her.
Yeah, absolutely. This was a game that I wasn't in I can't believe my eyes territory till kind of the second quarter where it hit me that this is real and actually happening. We had a moment, I believe it was the Minnesota game, where Indiana almost didn't score for the entire third quarter. And I was on air for that game. I was on air by myself because my color commentator couldn't, ended up having a conflict. So I'm just like kind of losing my mind on air. Like I can't tell if I'm even in real life. There's no one there next to me to like verify that I'm still awake and alive. That kind of was the same way I felt with this Northwestern game. Kind of hard to lose when you start 80% from the field and your opponent is 1 for 18. So as far as like takeaways from the game and how the team won, kind of hard to avoid that fact. But what stuck out to me was number one, it wasn't so much that they were playing well in transition with the turnovers. They obviously still turned the ball over a lot, and that has a lot to do with with Northwestern coming back, some great on-ball pressure from the Wildcats. But Indiana turning rebounds, which has been a weak point for them, into transition opportunities was something I noticed a great deal in both games, but mostly the Northwestern game. I feel like, I don't have the numbers down, I feel like I'm seeing more production on the glass from Shea Chesky. It's almost like it's I'm going to take it matters into my own hands situation with her in that way. But takeaways for me from this game, besides obviously the first quarter being outrageous, are Shea Chesky was awesome. I felt like there was more of a balanced scoring attack. I think it was Beaumont, Makaleski, and Chesky who combined. They all had over 20 points, and they scored all of but 11 points. So not really a balanced scoring attack, but certainly a lot from all three of them, which was very helpful. And turning those rebounds into transition buckets, taking away opportunities for Northwestern to score, and then immediately turning that into points for themselves was a big thing for the Hoosiers. So kind of just everything that has been a problem for Indiana, which I've said on this show a lot, I'm sure you've said on your podcast a lot as well, with the rebounds, particularly on offensive rebounds, the turnover piece, and the supporting cast production piece are like the three things that I've been harping on. And Indiana kind of remedied all of them in this win over Northwestern, particularly in the first quarter, and obviously that produces a victory.
Yeah, and kind of with that too, Shea had 8 rebounds. She had 9 yesterday against Wisconsin. I remember I asked her in the postgame presser, just like, have you guys been working on it? And she was just like, yes, we've definitely been working on it in practice. That's definitely a big thing that just has been lacking. And it was lacking from the team last season. They were, I believe, last in rebounds per game in the Big Ten, and I believe they're still at that mark this season. And I would say it's kind of due to their offense kind of sets. I mean, you have 4 people kind of just standing around the 3-point line, and then you just have one big down there, and you're kind of relying on them to get a lot of rebounds. Z can kind of do it a good amount. She's very aggressive. She's physical. She's fast. But Odessa is a little bit weaker in most of those areas. Odessa Noy on there. And kind of with that too, and you were talking about it, how those 3 20-point scores, I feel like, and I kind of wrote about it, and it was like in most games you'll have Shea getting hers, and then there's kind of that fall off for that second score, or it's like Shea and Lene will get theirs, and then you don't really have that third score. So it was good to see him kind of just have 3 20-point scores. Like you would like to see more production from the bench. I mean, they don't get too much minutes, but Journey Kiyaku's been playing very good recently with her kind of extended minutes. Faith Wiseman's been playing a little bit off the bench, and she's been performing pretty well, I'll say. And just back to those scores, I mean, 3 20-point scores, I believe that was the first time all season. And it was just good to see that and for them to pick up their first win in the Big Ten.
Absolutely. And I was there in person. You obviously were there. I was there in person as a fan. You were obviously in person, as a member of the media. And it's nice actually to hear that insight of being in the post-game press conference, because I have not been in a women's basketball post-game press conference, because obviously usually I'm there with student radio, and I got to take the equipment down and put it all in the back. And by the time I'm done, it's like awkward to come in late. So I just kind of let it go. And I am not writing anything, so there's really no reason for me to be there anyway. So it's good to hear that insight, because I've heard whispers of kind of what Terry Morin is like in those post-game press conferences, what Chesky might be like, and it's just interesting to hear that perspective from you, who's there every time.
Yeah, I'll say Terry's a very good talker, likes to talk a lot. Shea does too. I'd say we'll hit or miss from some other pieces, but they definitely all give good quotes to us, and they like our questions. I'll say that.
Absolutely. That's great to hear. And obviously you can find a lot of those quotes reading Sean's work at the IDS at any point. So that's kind of the Northwestern game. A ton of fun. 30-3 first quarter. In Assembly Hall, I'll note, which I thought about this a lot during the Wisconsin game, which is kind of a good segue, is I feel like, especially for the teams in the bottom 5, bottom 10 even, of Big Ten women's basketball, Indiana has a great crowd still. Obviously, there's a lot of basketball history here, but nobody was at the Wisconsin game. Hardly anybody, I should say, was at the Wisconsin game. There are plenty of other road environments that of teams kind of at a similar area in the standings that I've seen that don't have a lot of fans there. Rutgers, Penn State. It makes sense. It's not winning basketball most of the time, but Indiana also hasn't had winning basketball, but they still bring out a great fan crowd. And that was the case even against Northwestern, an unranked opponent, not necessarily a situation where the opponents are drawing in fans, like you could say for maybe Iowa or Michigan. And still a great crowd, very loud, a ton of fun. a group that absolutely deserved to see the performance that it got to see because of the loyalty that we've seen throughout the season. But then the Indiana women's team went on the road and they took on Wisconsin. This game happens last night, and Indiana pulls out a win 77-74. Indiana was ahead for much of the game. It felt to me exactly like the type of game that we've seen a million times this season. And I know you can certainly speak to this, where Indiana's in a good place, whether they're in contention with a good team, they're close with a good team at halftime, or they're leading against a team like Wisconsin, say. And halftime, you come out of the halftime break, it's the third quarter, and it's a 15-1 run or something like that. And Indiana's out of the game and it's over, and the fourth quarter's garbage time. And it, on TV, it happens within the span of 30 minutes, right? 10-minute third quarter, and before you know it, the game's over. That's happened for Indiana, especially in conference games many times this season. Not this time. This felt to me like the first time we've seen a true four quarters for Indiana. You could say that about Northwestern, but again, in the third quarter, Northwestern able to come back, that on-ball pressure, that full-court pressure. Great job there by the Wildcats. Pretty consistently, Indiana was ahead, and they were keeping themselves afloat and keeping themselves in front against Wisconsin, and they ultimately end up winning by 3. What are your main takeaways from the game last night?
Yeah, and it's those third quarters have plagued them all season. There's been a good amount of Big Ten games where you're going into halftime with a lead or kind of maybe just down by at least 5, kind of just between that 0 to 5 range. And then you come out of halftime and it's a slow start. And then they're down by 10. And I think that they're a younger team. You have 2 freshmen playing big minutes, a good amount of sophomores. Like Lene Beaumont is a redshirt sophomore, but Terry Morin kind of refers to her as a freshman because she didn't play at all last season. And I think that mentality it was together. And I think the win did help that. The Northwestern win kind of going into the game, they knew that they could get a win. But and with that too, 11 turnovers in the first half, and it's like that's been a problem that has plagued them this season. They only have 1 in the second half, and it's like that was a big change. And I think before that kind of win, I think the mentality of those 11 turnovers would have hurt this team a lot. And I think Wisconsin, because they got that win, it was kind of in like you were kind of saying with Northwestern, it was I can't believe my eyes territory. With Wisconsin, it was like I can't really believe my eyes because it feels like past games they've kind of just shut down. And there's a point where Wisconsin takes the lead, I believe, with about like a minute 30 in this game, or kind of a little bit around there. And I feel like past games they've kind of just shut down after that, but they didn't yesterday night, and that was really good to see them pick up their second conference win.
Yeah, absolutely. In talking to someone who also follows this team pretty closely, not for any media outlets, just, offhand conversation, this person was saying that it kind of feels like when this team goes down by 3 or goes down by 5, it feels like they're down by 30, and they play like they're down by 30, which I found to be an interesting perspective. But again, not this time. This game to me was one that was it certainly was optimal for a team that was hoping to have consistent offensive production. Maybe not outrageous offensive production, but just consistent offensive production, because Wisconsin kind of felt flat to me, especially as the home team. Obviously not a very raucous home crowd. Obviously Wisconsin, a team at the time 5-6 in the Big Ten. So, a team that maybe is prone to coming out flat. It felt that way to me in this game. Indiana didn't shoot well from the three-point line, which was not what they needed to win this game necessarily, because they were able to get downhill. I love those guards getting downhill to the paint, to the cup. They were able to score that way quite a bit. And that, whether that's Chesky, whether that's Beaumont, 6 players had at least 5 points. There were 3 in double digits. Journey Kyaku, a great example of that. You said that she's been playing great. I completely agree. A great example of a player that is amazing on high to low actions, and she was again against Wisconsin. So those guards moving from high to low, those guards moving downhill worked really well for Indiana. That pairs with the fact that they won 17-3 in terms of fast break points over Wisconsin. Those two ideas kind of go together. Wisconsin rebounding and shot making made it interesting in the fourth quarter. Obviously, this was nearly a complete collapse. Indiana lost the lead in the fourth quarter. But again, that Indiana offense, consistent for all 4 quarters. A little bit of outside shooting, but to me, mainly guards getting downhill and just, again, getting to the free throw line. That's something Indiana has been great at. Scoring at the blocks, scoring between the blocks, and just enough consistent offensive output for Indiana to where a Wisconsin team that didn't have a whole lot going for it, didn't really have one score step up and lead the way. It felt like Indiana able to eke out a win on the road, 77-74. And both of those games, critical, absolutely critical to the Big Ten tournament qualification race. I was thinking that before the Northwestern game. I was like, no one's going to be talking about it now, but if this team misses the Big Ten tournament, we're going to look back after the Penn State and Rutgers games and think about that Northwestern game. And obviously, very quickly, I realized that that probably was not going to be the conversation. Indiana ultimately ends up with a win. But Northwestern and Wisconsin, before we move on to kind of looking ahead, do you have any other thoughts on either one of those games, both those games, anything else in the past, perhaps, between those two?
I wanted to bring up just a Wisconsin point with them. They attempt the most three-pointers in the Big Ten. I think that's kind of a reason they've kind of picked off some of these, better Big Ten opponents, I'll say. It's head coach Robin Pidgeon's first season. She was at Missouri before this, moves to Wisconsin. She kind of has an older team, but they have a really distinct style, and that's going to they're going to put up threes. It's like they made 17 against Oregon earlier in the season. They made, I believe, 12 against Rutgers earlier in the season, and they only make 9. They shoot 22, only make 9. And I believe, and Indiana shoots really well from three-point range. And I came into that game and I was like, these are going to be two teams that are just going to shoot the three ball all night. And it really wasn't that. It was kind of surprising to see both teams try to get to the paint more. And it was interesting to see that. I mean, Wisconsin did kind of start making theirs as the game went on. That's kind of helped them stay close in the game. But Indiana this season has shot the ball really, really efficiently from the field. Like they don't put up too many shots in their games. Like they get outshot for attempts in most of their games. But when you look in the Big Ten, they're shooting second for three-point percentage. They're third in free throw percentage. I mean, if you want to look at kind of those more advanced stats, then you're fourth in effective field goal percentage and third in true shooting percentage. And it's like, so they can make their shots pretty efficiently, but it's just the rebounds and the turnovers have kind of played into that. They're just not putting up enough shots compared to the opponent.
Absolutely. I think you made a lot of great points. One of them, of course, Wisconsin, yes, with great three-point shooting, able to knock off some good teams, and that potentially is going to happen again. And yeah, absolutely. I think possessions just end so early for Indiana, where you see, and a lot of times it's dead ball turnovers, I've noticed, where if you look at the stat, if you don't watch the game and you just look at the box score, you see Indiana with markedly more turnovers than their opponent, but the opponent not having quite as many fast break points or anything like that. And so possessions just ending quickly with dead ball turnovers or even with live ball turnovers. Obviously an issue with Indiana not getting enough shots up. In this game, though, they were able to, they didn't have that three-point shooting, they didn't have the outside shooting, but it seemed like since both teams didn't have that outside shooting, Indiana was able to handle that adversity and encouragingly, obviously, be able to play better working downhill with those guards, as opposed to what Wisconsin was able to do.
And if I can add something, they're doing this without Zania, Saka, and Guman too, who was their kind of prize kind of transfer portal recruit, and she's been injured kind of off and on this season. And you have Adessa Noyon, she's a junior, she transfers in from Virginia. And I would say she had some pains, some kind of growing mistakes earlier in the season, but she's kind of come into that role. I think it's kind of been helped that she's been on the court so much. Terry Morin likes to play her starters a lot, and Adessa Noyon is one of those starters now. And I think she's kind of played a lot better as the season has gone on without Z in the lineup.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great point, too. She was obviously awesome. I told someone early in this season, the one player we absolutely cannot have injured, like more than Shea Chesky, more than anyone else, is Annie Sokogum. And a lot of that has to do with, obviously, this team typically plays with 4 guards and 1 big, and there's not a lot of depth in the front court there. And obviously that's played out the way that it has. But you're absolutely right. So very encouraging. Again, there's a ton of talent. There's a ton of value to this Indiana women's basketball team. More than many teams that I believe have better records than them in the Big Ten, but obviously for most of the season not quite able to put together the wins in conference, and now they're beginning to do so. And that takes me to our next and one of our last points here, is the fact that up next is Purdue at home for Indiana, and still at the end of the season this team gets to play Rutgers and Penn State, who are the only 2 teams below Indiana in the Big Ten standings. There's a revenge piece with Purdue, obviously a very bad game for them and for the Hoosiers in West Lafayette. But between that game, the Rutgers game, the Penn State game, the fact that Indiana now has a win over Northwestern, I'll ask you this, just yes or no, is Indiana qualifying for the Big Ten tournament at this point in the season?
After the last 2 games, I kind of wrote in my column, I was like, if you asked me last week, I would have said no. After these last 2 games, I'll admit it, I think I was wrong. I think they can. I think, as you kind of talked about, they have those two really, I would say, more favorable opponents. They're not definitely easy. Penn State just beat Purdue yesterday night to pick up their first Big Ten win, but they're not easy opponents in Penn State and Rutgers, but they're a little bit more favorable, I'll say, compared to others. And I think it will really depend too on what Northwestern and Purdue do. I guess what kind of results they get to end the season. Those two teams, I believe, play each other. They both have some tough opponents, but it's Northwestern plays Penn State and Purdue to kind of close out the season, but they also kind of have a gauntlet of Michigan, Michigan State, Maryland, USC, Illinois, all really good teams that Indiana has lost to, except USC. That game is next week. And then Purdue has to play Rutgers and Northwestern, but they also get Iowa and Maryland and Oregon too. So I think kind of they'll need to Indiana will need to turn those games into wins, but I think the results of the teams kind of in front of them will affect them too. Like, I don't think Purdue or Northwestern are going to get like really hot to end the season. I think that's something Indiana can do. I mean, it's a little tough when you have to go to USC and UCLA for Indiana this late into the season, especially those away games. But if they come out and perform well against USC, and UCLA has been, I don't know, a buzzsaw this season in the Big Ten, so we'll see about that game. But if you come out and play really good in LA, I think that gives this younger team a lot of confidence kind of in those Penn State and that Rutgers game that kind of end their regular season.
Absolutely. And if this team's going to make the Big Ten tournament, it probably means they're going to have to beat one or both of Penn State or Rutgers. And if they're beating one or both of Penn State and Rutgers, then they're kind of on a winning streak coming into the Big Ten tournament, and maybe they can turn that momentum into some postseason victories. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, they're half a game back from Northwestern, but they have the tiebreaker. Purdue's up there. They have an opportunity to even up that tiebreaker this weekend. That's a huge game, obviously, for the win column for both of those teams, and, of course, across the board, the tiebreaker and some of those qualification scenarios. Either way, it's going to be a race to the finish for Indiana in all of these teams. I know last year on the men's side, Northwestern was a team that I really liked and was really disappointed when they didn't make the Big Ten tournament, and someone's going to have that situation. I honestly really like the Northwestern team. I feel like their roster makes sense. You mentioned kind of some of their bright spots, their good moments from earlier in the season. And Purdue, obviously, they have great fans as well, and they have a roster that certainly has value to it. So there's going to be a team that's going to miss the Big Ten tournament, and people are going to be really, at least people like us, are going to be really disappointed to see them not quite make it. And maybe that team is Indiana, but it's looking like they're in position to potentially lift themselves into the top 15. Great conversation right there. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we kind of run through the outro here?
I was just going to say, don't forget about Penn State. Gracie Merkel, Kiyomi McMiller, two of the best scorers in the Big Ten there, kind of in State College. Last thing, Purdue game. Yep, that's Sunday before the Super Bowl. I would say big crowd probably coming out to that game, hopefully. I would say that Purdue game was kind of disappointment, kind of crowd-wise. The snow kind of played into that. But Indiana, they've had, I think, around 7,000 people per game. That's still a really good crowd in the Big Ten. Would love to see that kind of creep up towards maybe 10,000. Kind of a big crowd there, and I think the women's basketball team will respond to the big crowd too if they come out, kind of get them to, I don't know, be cheerful, be big in their good moments and Indiana's good moments. I think the team will play into that, and they do really need this win on Sunday. Absolutely.
So that'll certainly be fun to watch play out. I imagine you'll have a column out for the IDS on that game. I'll be there as a fan, more than likely, this Sunday afternoon. I keep forgetting about the Super Bowl. I'd spend so much time thinking about these kind of smaller IU sports that, the NFL kind of falls by the wayside in other sports like that. So once again, at the end here, what's coming up for you? Where can the people find you? Where can they find your work and all of those things? And, I'll let you kind of take the floor at the end here before we get out of here.
Yeah, just IDSnews.com. You can kind of go to the sports page, see if you see in big letters, it says column, and then there's a women's basketball photo there. It's probably my article. You follow me on Twitter. I'll have men's golf coverage, Indiana men's golf coverage in the spring when women's basketball ends. But what they have. Women's basketball has 5 games left on their schedule, I believe 6 games, and it's coming to a close. It's very surprising. It feels like it was just October, November, and it was just those non-conference games, and now we're thinking about postseason play and the end of the season. But I'm excited for those bigger games.
Yeah, absolutely. And that non-conference schedule felt like it was going on forever. We obviously appreciated it and enjoyed it, but conference play has, exactly as you're saying, gone by in a blink. So we appreciate you, Sean, for coming on. Appreciate you all for watching and listening. Obviously, you just heard where you can find Sean. There'll be a couple more segments of this show, this particular episode, sort of stitched together with this one coming up. But we appreciate you all watching and or listening to this episode of The Andrew Garrison Show featuring Sean McAvoy, and we will talk to you again next time. Welcome back to the Andrew Garrison Show. My name, of course, is Andrew Garrison. If you're watching and or listening to the full version of this show, then you just witnessed a conversation about IU women's basketball with one Sean McAvoy of the Indiana Daily Student. And now I want to discuss a different IU team. We'll do so solo. I want to talk about IU wrestling, who just took on Illinois on the road against Champaign. I guess I shouldn't say that they just took on Illinois. That was about 6 days ago that contest took place in Champaign against the Illinois Fighting Illini. That was last Friday night at 10 p.m., a late one. It was a part of the Big Ten Network tripleheader. Of course, ended up with the short end of the stick being the last match to take place. Indiana will go to take on Wisconsin this Saturday, a meet that I'm very excited to witness. But until then, we have this Illinois matchup to discuss. I have some overall thoughts, and then I have 5 individual matches that I want to sort of highlight at this point after seeing sort of what went down in those matchups last weekend. Overall, this is certainly, to me, more of a statement about Illinois emerging at the top of the Big Ten this season than it is about Indiana sort of faltering. Illinois ultimately won 27-7. Illinois, I believe, ranked number 10 in the country. At least they were at the time in which this match took place. Indiana way down at number 24, but still ranked, still certainly a formidable opponent for the Fighting Illini, even in Champaign. And again, this was a statement for Illinois. This to me felt like a team that was going to round into form. It felt like a team that was going to improve a great deal over the course of the season, and it seems as if that is exactly what has happened. They win 27-7. They win 8 out of 10 individual matches. Every ranked Illinois wrestler that stepped onto the mat on Friday night won. That included 2 ranked upsets over Indiana, in which 2, ranked Illinois wrestlers beat wrestlers that were ranked higher than them, namely Jacob Moran and Sam Goen were the 2 Hoosiers that fell in that fashion. And those are the 2 matchups that I want to talk about first. Again, Illinois ultimately dominates. They win 8 out of 10. There's 3 categories of matchups individual matchups that I want to talk about. I want to talk about the 2 upsets. I want to talk about the 2 wins that Indiana was able to put together. And then there's one sort of wild card match at the end that I want to talk about that stuck out to me. Kind of an outstanding performance, I suppose you could call it. But as far as notable matchups go in terms of upsets, there's obviously just 2, one of which began the entire meet. It was at 125 pounds. Number 11, Jacob Moran, scored 3 points, and number 20, Spencer Moore, scored 6 after sudden victory concluded with a Spencer Moore decisive takedown. Now, I'll be honest, I didn't watch this match live. The broadcast hadn't switched from Nebraska-Penn State to Indiana-Illinois. I was also watching Nebraska-Penn State, and again, that one ran a little bit long, and then Big Ten Network hadn't switched to Indiana-Illinois quite yet. It was also on the Fox Sports app, I believe, and I was trying to download the Fox Sports app, and then by the time I could actually figure out and get it up, the matchup had switched to Big Ten Network and switched to Indiana-Illinois. So by the time the broadcast got to Champaign, we were halfway through the matchup at 1:33. So I didn't watch this one live, but obviously went back and witnessed it. Moran scores first, and it was that early takedown for Moran that sort of appeared to be that early energy, that early success, that early example that Moran was able to set for the rest of the lightweights in many of the other duels. Put together a lot of content last week after the matchup against Michigan State about Moran and about how his success at 125 is critical to the rest of the lightweight portion of the roster and just important to the roster as a whole. To start off dual meets with Moran succeeding and often winning not only puts the Hoosiers ahead on the scoreboard, but also puts the Hoosiers ahead in terms of energy energy, intensity, and just the exemplary wrestling that Moran puts together right away is a big deal for the Hoosiers. And it looks like we were going to see that again. Again, he's against a ranked opponent, a tough opponent, but one that is ranked lower than him. Moran scores first, but then Spencer Moore, number 20 Spencer Moore for Illinois, at least at the time, number 20 Spencer Moore, he forces overtime, we're into sudden victory, and then just like that, he has a takedown, a very nice takedown in sudden victory time, leading to Illinois sort of stunning the Hoosiers and winning the first bout at 125. That was a big one for Indiana. Again, Illinois higher ranks than Indiana as a team, so certainly it would help if Indiana would be able to win the matches in which they are likely to win because they have the higher ranked wrestler. That didn't happen at 125. Come to find out, that wouldn't be the first time that had occurred where there's an Illinois upset. But Moran loses right away, and that, again, that's a big deal because that early success for Indiana, not quite there in the same way, and obviously they're down on the scoreboard right away. Not something you typically see. They're down on the scoreboard, and then at 133, Illinois has the number one wrestler in the country in that weight class, being Lucas Bird. It's a big deal, right? So that loss at 125 honestly kind of doomed the Hoosiers to a loss across the board because you're kind of guaranteed to couple that with a loss against number one Lucas Bird, and now you're down probably with bonus points. They weren't down with bonus points, but regardless, you're down by 2 matches right away, and it's just a lot to come back from. So to win early with Jacob Moran was going to be huge for the Hoosiers, and it didn't happen. It was an upset for Spencer Moore. Of course, credit to him for the Fighting Illini for making that happen. But that, again, was a huge deal for Indiana. The other upset occurred much later. By that time, the meet was pretty much wrapped up. It's at 184. Number 14, Sam Goen, who has been awesome recently. He scored 3 points. Number 20, Chris Moore, another number 20 wrestler for Illinois, scored 5 points. That's a regular decision victory for the Fighting Illini. The first period contained a lot of time on the feet. That happens a lot when you have two wrestlers that are ranked very closely to one another. Goen scores a takedown, though. Again, he scores first, just like Moran. It ends up being 3-2 at the end of 2 periods, right? Because you see Moore escape in the first period from Goen's takedown. Goen wasn't able to ride him out, and then he escapes early in the second after starting on bottom. So it's 3-2, and Chris Moore decides to go neutral in the third period against Goen. Sort of foregoes the opportunity to, or rather, prevents the opportunity for any escape point to be scored in the third period. The 2 start from neutral. Moore makes that decision because he wants to go for the winning takedown. Even if he escapes, going to need a takedown anyway. So obviously going for the winning takedown, and he does succeed. He finds that takedown late in the third period, and a little bit more scoring, but that's it pretty much. Chris Moore went neutral and struck gold with what he was looking for, able to upset Sam Goen. So it's 2 very similar archetypes of upsets, perhaps, where the higher-ranked wrestler, Moran and Goen, they both started out strong. They both scored first, and then it just stays close, and they can't pull away, and these Illinois wrestlers, hang around, they stick around, obviously ranked, obviously there's a lot of quality to them, and then whether it's sudden victory or whether it's late in the third period, they pop that late takedown starting from neutral and ultimately swing the results in their favor, and the match sort of ends out of nowhere, and you kind of stand bewildered thinking, wow, I can't believe that's over. I can't believe the Hoosier lost in that situation. So that happened to Sam Goen, and that happened to Jacob Moran. Jacob Moran obviously right away, a very tough loss for the Hoosiers. Goen a little bit later on, also a very tough loss. I don't remember exactly if that was the matchup that ended the duel, if that indicated that Illinois had the win or not. But regardless, Indiana in a tough spot after both of those upsets. 2 of their highest ranked wrestlers across the board, 2 of their very best wrestlers on the roster, and they both lost to Illinois. Again, that just plays into the fact that this was a statement emergent victory for Illinois. They beat a team ranked lower than them, not a huge deal, but the way they did it was a big deal for Illinois. And again, they're emerging onto the scene. They're not Penn State, but they can compete with teams like Penn State and Ohio State. And obviously they have a defending national champion in Lucas Bird, may very well have a national champion again at 133 in Lucas Bird, although that's a very interesting weight class for a variety of reasons. So a great win for Illinois. Great individual wins from Chris Moore and Spencer Moore for Illinois. And they move on with 2 upset victories. Now, Indiana, they had 2 wins as well, and this is just 2 wins that they were able to pick up. At 141, number 24 Henry Porter beat Cole Brower by major decision. This is an interesting one because we could have been looking at a much more interesting matchup for Illinois. Number 23 Dana Pacino was out with an injury, so Porter pretty much had an easier win, had the easy way out against Brower. He went for the major decision. This was kind of the big story for Indiana, at least in terms of positive stories, in that first half of the meet where Porter and Escobedo, head coach Angel Escobedo, they're really pushing to try to get that major decision. Escobedo and that coaching staff really pushing for the major decision, really pushing for the bonus points. It obviously was huge to get the Hoosiers back in the match at that time. And Porter succeeded. A late takedown. He's able to clutch the major decision points. It's 12-3. It's a 9-point victory. Very well could have been a regular decision, but really spurred some momentum and displayed some fight for the Hoosiers with that major decision win. Porter was able to get it there late in the final minutes. And then at 197, you have Gabe Sollers, number 15 for Indiana, versus Dylan Connell. Sollers wins 6-0, regular decision. It's similar to 184 with Sam Goen. There's a relatively uneventful first period, except this time it's Sollers that's scoring and really really wrestling conservatively. He has an escape, he has a takedown, and then he rides out Connell, and Connell's not able to initiate any offense basically the rest of the way, and that's an opportunity for Sollers to, of course, score and win. So it's 6-0. It's just a regular decision, a clean regular decision victory, but efficient, right? You escape, you take him down, and then you ride him out for the rest of the period, and that's all there is to it. And that's effectively what Sollers was able to do for the majority of that match at 197. So those are the two wins. Porter and Sollers, two ranked wrestlers, pick up wins for Indiana. We had the two upsets, Moran falls, Goen falls. That's a huge deal, right? Those are perhaps the two best wrestlers on this Indiana roster across the board this season. If someone's going to win a national championship for Indiana, it's probably one of those two this season. Those two wins for Illinois, absolutely critical to their ultimate 27-7 victory over Indiana across the board. One last matchup I want to talk about, though, is at 133. Number 1, Lucas Bird scored 7 points, and Jackson Bloom scored 1 point, and that's a freshman for Indiana. And he's someone that hasn't necessarily been at the forefront, at the very tip-top of the rotation for Indiana throughout the season at 133. We've seen Blaine Frazier, we've seen Logan Frazier. This time we saw Jackson Bloom, and the young kid really fought, and he wrestled very, very well. Again, the broadcast cut to Big Ten Network. It cut to Champaign with Bird up 4-0 in the middle of this one. He puts together another takedown. It's 7-0. And then in that third period, Bloom escaped and defended well. And in period 3, basically was able to survive and prevent bonus points from being scored by number 1 Lucas Bird. That is a huge deal. Number 1 Lucas Bird, the defending national champion, one of the best pound-for-pound wrestlers in the NCAA right now, and Jackson Bloom's a freshman, and he steps in and is able to survive 7-1, avoids any bonus points from being scored by by Lucas Bird. That's a huge deal. A respectable performance for the freshman, Jackson Bloom. I really appreciated that early on. Again, it was kind of an auto loss. There's an understanding that Lucas Bird is very, 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 very likely to beat Jackson Bloom on a given day. Obviously did this time, but to not score bonus points there, and that paired with what soon after was the Henry Porter win for Indiana, that really made it feel like Indiana was in this, right? Despite the fact that Moran lost right away, it felt like Indiana was in it because they prevented bonus points from being scored by Bird and then scored bonus points themselves with Porter. A great sequence for the Hoosiers. And there was, a timeout in between, because the broadcast cuts between 133 and 141. So there's a break in between, but across the break, a huge sequence for Indiana, a big deal at 133 and 141. So I wanted to shout out Jackson Bloom because, again, that was a great bout for him against number 1 Lucas Bird, about as good as you can ask for in that situation. Porter with a nice win. He chases bonus points and achieves them. Sollers with a nice, efficient, conservative win at 197 late in the duel, even after it was already wrapped up. And then unfortunately for the Hoosiers, you have Sam Goen, number 14, going down against Chris Moore, and then number 11, Jacob Moran, falling to number 20, Spencer Moore, both with those late takedowns. It's a totally different matchup if those late takedowns don't occur, but those late takedowns did occur, and that leads us to the situation where Indiana obviously loses 27-7 on the road. So a tough outing for Indiana, but again, Indiana wrestled well. Bloom wrestled well. Even those two upset losses with Moran and Goen, I feel like they wrestled very well. There's a parallel universe where they win both of those, and we're having a completely different conversation about how this match sort of shook out, and potentially a much different conversation down the stretch, especially if Illinois was able were not quite able to pull away late. But regardless, a tough one for Indiana. They wrestled well. It's way more about Illinois being awesome than it is about Indiana being lackluster in this situation. 100%. That's my opinion and my takeaway. Illinois is awesome. They're top 10 for a reason. I would have to look at the rest of their schedule for the rest of their matchups, but certainly there's some exciting stuff going on for Illinois the rest of the way. We'll have to monitor Lucas Bird and his chase for another national championship. There are plenty of other wrestlers that are likely to make deep runs in those NCAA tournament championships. The Big Ten championships as well. That tournament's going to be very, very fascinating across the board, and Illinois, again, very much in contention. Last year, you had Penn State win the national championship, and Nebraska was second. Maybe it's the same this year. Maybe it's Iowa. Maybe it's someone else. But it could totally be Illinois. And Illinois is a team just like that I think could be very much in play at the top of the Big Ten and at the top of the NCAA tournament, as they have been throughout, as they've proven to be capable of doing throughout this season. So again, 2 upset losses, 2 tough ones, 2 nice wins, and a standout performance and a loss that I really appreciated from a freshman in Jackson Bloom. Not a bad outing for Indiana, a great outing for Illinois. That's the ultimate takeaway from those 2 teams' wrestling duel on Friday night. Now, Indiana will go to Madison, Wisconsin, and will take on the Badgers, number 17 Wisconsin at last check, this Saturday. I believe that starts at 2 p.m., so that will be fascinating and interesting. I'm going to watch it with my guy Noah Bedoris, who's come on this show before, and we'll talk a lot about wrestling obviously during that time, and very fascinating. That one will be between Indiana and Wisconsin, and then we prepare for Indiana to return home to take on Nebraska not too far from now. That's in about a week. So very exciting stuff coming for Indiana. Plenty more opportunities. Wisconsin's a team that they have good wrestlers. Wisconsin and Illinois are very similar, right? They're ranked in a similar area, right? In terms of the Big Ten standings, they're in a similar area. Illinois has really impressed me throughout the season, and I felt great about Illinois. I don't feel quite as good about Wisconsin, and I think if there's a ranked Big Ten team that's going to lose to another Big Ten team, I think Wisconsin might be the pick. Indiana very well could be the pick in that situation too, but Wisconsin versus Indiana could be very interesting, and I'm looking forward to that matchup this weekend because I think Indiana is going to be able to put together a little bit more fight than many would expect, especially on with a great deal of rest, right? That would be about 8 days of rest, whereas sometimes there's only 2 days of rest between matchups. So looking forward to that. Very interested in what's going to happen between Indiana and Wisconsin this weekend, and that will be what's left to watch play out. We'll hopefully have a podcast some point next week to talk about that duel. Either way, Indiana 7, Illinois 27. Illinois is awesome. Indiana still very, very good. That's what I have to say about Indiana wrestling this week. All right, you're watching and or listening to The Andrew Garrison Show. My name, of course, is Andrew Garrison. So far this episode, you've heard or seen, if you're watching the full episode, you've seen a conversation about IU wrestling, featuring simply myself. Indiana lost to Illinois last Friday night. You've also seen an IU women's basketball conversation with one Sean McAvoy of the Indiana Daily Student. We talked about Northwestern. We talked about Wisconsin. We talked about those 2 games and those 2 wins for IU women's basketball. And now I want to transition to the final topic of the day, a kind of fun, kind of off-topic subject, and that is, of course, the UFC, because for just about 19 years of my life, I had not watched a UFC event live. That changed this past weekend. It was Volkanovski, it was Lopez, it was UFC 325. It was on Paramount Plus, and I watched it. It was my first time. I was intrigued. I was compelled enough to obviously construct a whole segment to talk about on this show. UFC 325, through the eyes of a first-time viewer, that's kind of where I am at. Again, I hadn't watched a UFC event for my entire life until this moment. I had gone through phases where you watch enough social media edits of Conor McGregor, Leon Edwards, guys like that. There's obviously some level of intrigue, but the real barrier, apart from not really growing up in a very combat sports friendly space, it's not something I grew up around. It's not something I was exposed to. It's not something that was kind of like ingratiated into my perspective of what sports are and what the sports world is. Combat sports were kind of not involved in that. And still, it's probably not really my thing. I prefer basketball. I prefer football. I prefer many of those other, mainstream team sports, I suppose you could say. But nonetheless, I started watching college wrestling because I have been broadcasting college wrestling for Big Ten Plus this year, here at Indiana University. And so kind of having a background in wrestling, that paired with the fact that obviously the UFC is no longer on pay-per-view, it's now on Paramount Plus, made it much more accessible and much more appealing to me, I suppose you could say, now that I had a way to watch it. And when I was watching it, I kind of understood a little bit better what was going on, just because of that wrestling background that has sort of established over the course of the last few months. And so UFC 325, I thought I'd give it a shot. There are definitely probably millions of people that decided to give UFC a shot after its move to Paramount Plus. Again, it's a little bit more accessible now. It was Alexander Volkanovski defending his featherweight championship against Diego Lopez. This is the second time that title fight has occurred between these two fighters, and Volkanovski wins once again, this time in Sydney, Australia. So some first impressions, right? Because again, I come in with an understanding of how the UFC works, right? I understand the belt system. I understand the rankings. I understand the weight classes. I understand kind of the landscape of what it is. I just hadn't watched it live quite yet. I was watching with a couple friends, one of which was completely new to the sport, had no idea what was going on, in a good way, kind of discovering. And then, a couple other people that have kind of had some experience. They watch it quite a bit, are very aware of the sport and kind of what it contains. So first impressions from an experience perspective, that's kind of the context on what I'm coming into this through. Then you have first impressions of the experience. I want to talk about some of the fights, especially Volkanovski and Lopez, of course, primarily. The walkout songs were very fun, and that certainly got me excited. Obviously, I don't know exactly what song Diego Lopez walked out to, but certainly, sparked some excitement. And then obviously in his home country, in Sydney, Australia, you have Alexander Volkanovski walking out to Down Under by Men at Work. A ton of fun. I've listened to that song like probably 10 times. It's got to be, if they did a Spotify Wrapped for just 1 week, that song would be in my number one song this week since this fight occurred, for sure, because just such an exciting moment. The crowd is into it. The crowd surely was incredibly loud in that arena as he's walking out, as they're celebrating sort of their hometown hero, I suppose you could say, in Volkanovski. And that's obviously just backed up and supported by the fact that he goes out and wins and defends his title at 37 years old. Again, combat sports, not really my forte, not really. I don't know how much more I'm going to invest from a time and energy perspective into this sport. I struggle with combat sports sometimes. It'll sound weird, but the picture-perfect best-case scenario fight for me is kind of exactly what happens when Volkanovski and Lopez, where there's a ton of respect between the two. They love each other. They're, handshakes, hugs, all of that. And it's a fight that goes 5 rounds and no one really gets hurt. Because I like the chess match aspect of it. I like the mental aspect of it. I like the technique aspect of it. And obviously the grandeur aspect of it, with just the fact that, the walkout songs and the crowds and all of that, just there's so much hype built around a given title fight because of how few they are. And I prefer kind of the chess match aspect. I don't like the violence, I suppose you could say, is what I'm trying to get at. I struggle with that, which is probably going to very quickly eliminate my interest in this sport. But again, I tried it out and I felt compelled to talk about it on the podcast. That's exactly what we're going to do. Kind of paired with that idea the point that I just made, and the fact that, of course, I have a wrestling background with the NCAA and the Big Ten. I like the wrestling the most, and so what stuck out the most to me between Volkanovski and Lopez was the fact that Lopez's takedown defense seemed to be pretty good. Volkanovski went for multiple takedown attempts. Obviously, Lopez was able to avoid them time and time again. Obviously lost the fight in other ways, but that was something that just stuck out to me. His ability to stay on his feet, I was very impressed by against Volkanovski. The mutual respect between these two was awesome. They're obviously both amazing. They're obviously both great at what they do. Volkanovski has won both times, but Lopez has in many ways made it close both times. And so I found that interesting. And I just love the mutual respect in between rounds, after the fight, across the board. Just the two of them clearly great at what they do at the very top of their craft, and appreciate that fact about one another, which I, again, just very much appreciated and found very compelling and very, very enjoyable. Volkanovski and Lopez, the actual fight itself at the end of the night. I'm a big fan of both of these guys now. I'm mainly a fan of Volkanovski. Again, Lopez's takedown defense was awesome. I like Volkanovski because he's on the older side. He's kind of a fan favorite. It would be cool to see him never lose again in the UFC. It'd be cool to see him retire whenever he wants to retire, but continue to win until that happens. I would appreciate that the most right now in the UFC. I would hate to see Volkanovski lose. I would hate to see Lopez lose as well, but obviously between these two, somebody has to lose. Lopez, great energy. Again, between both these guys, great energy, great aura, great presence. Just they both clearly enjoy being there. They both clearly enjoy performing, again, at the very highest level. in mixed martial arts across the board. So Lopez seems to be an awesome guy, and I really appreciated watching him. Volkanovski seems to be an awesome guy as well. Very inspirational. I watched his 30-minute, reflection video on YouTube where after he was home, he had his belts and he was kind of, just reflecting on the experience of UFC 325 as the person in the octagon that did indeed emerge victorious. I had no idea who was winning until we got to round 5. And I don't think I'm alone in that. I think a lot of people that know a lot about this sport obviously also agreed that they had no idea who was winning, especially after the first 2 rounds or so. Just absolutely no idea. Obviously, I'm not a judge. Obviously, I've never watched the sport live before, but you kind of can tell with a sport like this who has the upper hand many times. And in this case, could not tell at all whatsoever, which fighter was potentially going to emerge victorious, which made this very exciting and interesting. Obviously, Volkanovski pretty much sealed it in the 5th round, establishing his dominance, establishing his advantage. But again, Lopez, some good takedown defense. Both guys were getting some great shots in. Both guys were having some great moments. Volkanovski just so good and so methodical and just so fascinating to watch. His fight IQ is unbelievable, and just to watch him work and to watch him do what he does and watch him methodically work at Lopez until he had scored, for lack of a better term, scored enough points to win, right? Put enough of a difference between himself and Lopez, and then obviously putting an exclamation point on it in the 5th round. That was an incredibly fascinating, compelling process to watch, and across the board, just a good time. Great respect between the two of them. It went 5 rounds. It was very even. That's the type of fight that I would want, and so I appreciated, obviously, witnessing that take place at UFC 325 at the very end of the night. The walkout songs were awesome, and it was just a great way. It was just a great way for Volkanovski to defend his title. It was done right in Sydney. He wins a very, 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 very great battle against Lopez, someone who, again, the two have great respect for one another. It was Volkanovski's home crowd, great walkout song. Good experience. At the end of the day, that was good, and that was a nice way for it to begin and end in Sydney between those two fighters. The rest of the card, there were some other fights that obviously I have some fascinating thoughts about. There were some things that stuck out to me. I'll go from I suppose biggest fight to least big fight. Right, you've got the co-main event between St. Denis and Hooker. I believe that was or St. Denis rather, and Hooker. I need to figure out how to pronounce his name, but the two of them. That was a fascinating one. It's a technical knockout in round 2. It's St. Denis with a dominant victory once again. I kind of like him a lot. I was watching the day of. I was watching the UFC fight marathon on YouTube, that live stream, just to kind of get a feel for some of the guys that were going to obviously be stepping into the octagon. And St. Denis, I watched the fight against somebody where he, knocked the guy out like 16 seconds. So he seems to be an up and coming really prodigy maybe in the lightweight division. The lightweight division is clearly very deep. I've learned that very quickly, and we'll talk a little bit more about some more lightweights a little bit later on as well. But St. Denis might be the next guy. I think he's number 5 now. He moved from number 8 to number 5. He's a spot above Paddy Pimblett right now. I wonder who's next for him. Maybe it's Paddy Pimblett. In his win streak, his 4 fights, something like that win streak, St. Denis, his win streak, he's been fighting like once every 2 months. So kind of quick turnarounds for him. We'll see if that slows down as he climbs up the rankings, but he seems to be kind of the next guy at lightweight. We'll see what happens once, we're going to get to a point eventually where someone's going to have to obviously take the title from Topuria or Gaethje or whatever happens, whether Topuria gets stripped and Gaethje gets bumped up or the two fight for the main title. I have no idea, but St. Denis in the mix, and he's clearly in the mix to really knock off some big names, and I think he proved that with how dominant his win over Hooker was this past weekend. You then have a little bit before that at heavyweight, you have Taliesin Teixeira and Tai Tuivasa. I apologize if pronouncing either one of those names wrong. Both were just exhausted by the end of round 3. Teixeira was taking some hits towards the end, and I thought, if this is a situation where someone's going to have to knock out the other, maybe Tuivasa's the guy to do that. Tuivasa has been on a, I believe, 5-fight losing streak. That's now has dropped to a 6-fight losing streak. Teixeira won by unanimous decision. By the end of this one, he was, I believe, on top and in control for the majority of the first round, if I'm remembering correctly. But nonetheless, that's 6 straight losses for Tuivasa. The takeaway, they just were both exhausted, and it was going to be Teixeira the whole way, unless Tuivasa was going to be able to put together a knockout by the end of it. He was not quite able to do so, and the fight ended the way the fight ended. I don't know the way to pronounce this guy's name, but Quillen Salkild at lightweight, I believe unranked, I believe very early in his UFC career, won via submission in round 1 over Jamie Malarkey. And Salkild, very good wrestler, which I appreciate because, again, I'm more of a wrestling guy, more of a grappling guy than a striking guy, I suppose, in the UFC. Just more proof that the lightweight division is unbelievably deep. I have no idea who could possibly, the lightweight division is going to be ridiculous. If there's any lightweight fight in any fight card on any main event, it's clearly going to be a movie. And Salkild's going to work his way up there. St. Denis is already working his way up there. You obviously got Pimblett that's still trying to win a title. You got Gaethje and Topuria. Topuria, arguably the best in the world maybe right now. Obviously Makhachev is the pound-for-pound best, but Topuria is amazing. So until some of these guys retire or switch weight classes, it's going to be very hard to break through. But there's so many contenders that could break through at lightweight that it's making that division incredibly fascinating to watch play out. And we'll see more of that sort of throughout the next few weeks and months as we get through the next few fight nights and obviously numbered events, Max Holloway and Charles Oliveira coming up. But Salkild is awesome. Again, great wrestler. And he wins very, very swiftly against Malarkey in very impressive fashion. So I'm interested to see how his career plays out and how his career develops the rest of the way. Nonetheless, across the board, a new experience for me, an interesting experience for me. We'll see if I watch again. I probably won't take the time to watch every fight night every week. We'll see what happens the next numbered event, how I feel, whether or not I'm interested in Oliveira and Holloway. But either way, that'll be UFC 326. That was UFC 325. Alexander Volkanovski is still the champion at the featherweight division, and we'll see how many more fights he has left in him. He seems like he's ready to take on the next guy, and we'll see who that ends up being at featherweight at some point, potentially later this year. But nonetheless, that's what I have to say about the UFC. That's what I have to say about IU wrestling a little bit earlier on, and that's what I have to say about IU women's basketball with one Sean McAvoy a little bit early on as well. I appreciate you all for watching and tuning in to this episode, whether you're watching, whether you're listening, wherever you are, whenever you are indeed listening to this episode. I appreciate you a great deal. My name is Andrew Garrison. We're probably not going to have another show the rest of this weekend. Some news from me. I'm going to be a softball beat reporter for the Hoosier Network this season. I'm very interested and excited for that experience. The softball team is on today, and which that will be incredibly exciting. In less than 3 hours, the softball team will take the diamond against Florida Atlantic at Florida Atlantic. So I'm very excited for that matchup. And sort of the whole, it's the Paradise Classic this weekend. I'm excited for that. Look out for potentially some Hoosier Network content coming out from me in the near future. Very excited to get started on that. So a lot of softball content coming to this podcast as well, because I'm going to be watching a lot of softball. My weekends, I probably won't watch this much softball, but I have this system where obviously I watch every game of the teams that I cover, and then I watch the 3 games of that team's opponents sort of leading up to the game. So, for example, IU softball is going to play Ohio State tomorrow night, and so I'm going to watch there's not 3 games, but I'm going to watch, I would be watching the 3 games leading up to that Ohio State game of Ohio State. So if I follow that system, I will be wall-to-wall 12 hours a day watching softball this weekend just because of how much there is, and they're playing back-to-back and that sort of thing. We'll see how much I actually get to, but either way, going to watch every Indiana softball game this weekend. We'll have plenty to discuss about that next week for sure. And other than that, plenty of other softball that I'll sort of get my eyeballs on. I think the first matchup I'm going to watch tomorrow is Wisconsin and Stonehill at 9 a.m., which will be exciting, will be interesting, certainly will be worth the time. So I'm excited. I'm interested. Softball, bring it on. I'm ready for the spring semester. I'm in the spring semester, but I'm ready for the spring season, spring sports season. Wrestling, a winter sport, it's kind of in its waning weeks. I'm excited about the rest of the wrestling season for sure. Women's basketball also, as we discussed with Sean, sort of in the waning weeks, and ready to bring in softball to kind of bring home the semester as I prepare to end my first year at Indiana University as a freshman. I will do so while on the softball beat with the Hoosier Network. So I'm very excited about that. I'm very interested to see how that plays out. I'm excited to watch the team take the field today against Florida Atlantic. And again, thoughts on softball next week. More than likely thoughts on Indiana women's basketball. Definitely thoughts on wrestling. I'm hoping to have another guest on at some point next week. That could be Noah Bodoris once again for wrestling. I haven't talked to any of these guys about this, so I shouldn't just name drop people. But potentially wrestling conversation with a guest, maybe a women's basketball conversation with a guest, softball conversation potentially with a guest as well. Plenty to be excited about for the Andrew Garrison Show, and plenty to be excited about in the sports world across the board. Oh, by the way, the Super Bowl is this weekend. I keep forgetting about that, but that's something to be excited about on Sunday evening. Either way, thank you so much for watching and or listening to this show. I appreciate you all a great deal. My name is Andrew Garrison. You're watching and or listening to The Andrew Garrison Show, and I will talk to you again next time.